So now we're going to create this into a macro. And here we're going to use do-while loops. So this is a little bit tricky. You can go back to doing regular do loops where you provide the counting number. You don't have to do this, but it is a way to keep us from having to specify how many variables we're getting and letting SAS do it itself. We're going to do a dataset myDat. We're going to have an outcome variable that we're interested in, and then we're going to have a list of X variables that we're interested in. So we're going to loop through X variables, and then we're going to put all of this PDF output that we're going to generate into a file as well. So the way this works is we have to start by initializing the counter. So we're going to let SAS decide when it comes to the end of the list, and we're going to have to start by saying, well, start at the beginning of the list, because we're not going to have a do loop that starts with an I anymore. We have to initialize that I ourselves. So outside of our loop, we start by initializing the counter to be 1. Then we scan the list of variables for our current variable, in this case our X variables. We have an outcome and a list of X variables. So let the current variable be scan the list of X variables for the ith word. So we're starting at the first word. That's outside my do loop. I have to start by telling it where to start. Now I'm going to go into the do loop, and I'm going to say do while the current variable is not equal to nothing. So the while ampersand curve art and then NE, that's not equal to. And then I left it blank. So while the current variable is not equal to nothing, so that means it's equal to something. While the current variable exists, while there's a thing there to grab, do this loop. So that's a little tricky, this little statement right here. While the current variable is not equal to nothing. We can't really say equals something, that's harder in SAS, but we can say not equal to nothing. And then we're going to basically run the code that we had before, proc in par one way, on a data set. We're changing the data set now to ampersand myData. We are analyzing the current variable in the class statement. So that's the one that we picked out of the variable list. We're analyzing the outcome variable, and we're asking for it to generate the output, ODS output, and store that into a data set. Then we are going through and doing our data null code. This is actually copied 100%. There's no macro variables in here except for one thing that we did. And that is instead of just having p-value, now we're looping. So we're going to have a p-value for each X variable that we analyze. So I have a p-value with an ampersand I after it in double quotes. Remember, double quotes will translate the macro variable, but single quotes would not. So even though I might have used single quotes up here, I did. If I tried to use single quotes down here, it won't work because I need that ampersand I to be translated. So that's just getting what we had before into a macro, but we haven't done anything interesting with it. We just have these p-values sitting in SAS's brain. But what we want is SAS to use these p-values. So this is a little bit tricky. But before we can even talk about that, we got to talk about how we can get out of this loop. So notice that at the beginning we set it to I. Well, what we need it to do is before we end this loop, we need to count I up, and we need to rescan the variable list. So that's what happens at the end of our loop when we do while, but inside our loop, but at the end. Let I be I plus 1, but you have to do %eval to actually get it to do the addition with macro variables. So let I be equal to %eval, ampersand I plus 1, and then let the current variable be scan that list for the ith variable. Then we end our do while loop. It'll go back. Now I will be 2, and it'll do 3, and it'll do 4. And what happens is when it gets to the end, the next variable, let's say there's 9 variables, at the end of the 9th loop, I becomes 10, and when it goes back to the top and scans for the 10th word, it finds nothing, and then this statement becomes a problem. The current variable is equal to nothing, so that statement is no longer true. The current variable is nothing, but that's what's happening. Once we get the current variable to be missing, the loop will stop. And so here what we want to do is we want to have it basically put a conclusion in our PDF file. So a lot of this ugliness is some of the PDF text here, but let's worry about the code. So I'm going to create a PDF file. I'm going to do ODS escape character, ODS PDF text, the outcome variable. It's going to give me the outcome variable's name. Then I'm going to again do this little do loop to go back through these p-values and report them. We could have done this in our original loop, but I didn't feel like I wanted to make it that complicated up there. I wanted to get that loop done so you would understand it. But again, we're doing a do while, so it's just another do while loop. And inside that, I'm putting the macro variables to help me debug if I need to. And then I'm saying if, now this is a little complicated. This is actually really complicated right here. If ampersand, ampersand, p-value, ampersand, I. So what happens is that p-value is actually a macro variable, so I have to have ampersand p-value, and then ampersand I is a macro variable, so I have to put those together. But when I put two together, that's a new macro variable, and so I have to have this extra ampersand out front, and this actually can chain quite dramatically if you get too complicated with it. So that's a little bit tricky. If the macro variable p-value is bigger than 0 but less than 0.05, then, and here we have a %do with a semicolon, and this end ends that do. So I can actually put multiple statements between that do and that end, the %do and end there, so I could do more than just print this p-value. I could have a whole set of output that gets produced under that. So that's why I was saying you could have, if it's categorical, do all this stuff. If it's quantitative, do all this stuff. So between that do and that end, you could have whole huge amounts of analyses that happen. But here we're just printing a simple message that says the association is significant. And then if it's the opposite, if the p-value is greater than 0.05, then print a message that says it's not significant. And we need this sys eval because we're having it compare a macro variable to a number, and it would do that text to text if we don't tell it to think about the macro variable as a number. So the sys eval f is a way to tell it to evaluate it, and it could be a decimal, which is what the f is for, versus the regular old everyday eval that we used right here. If I add integers, just plain eval is fine, but I need to add decimals or compare decimals or work with decimals, then I have to use this sys eval f to deal with that. And so let's submit this and try to see what happens. So let's submit the macro. And again, nothing really should happen here, no errors or messages. And then let's submit it. We'll do it twice. And I'm telling it MACROS 3A PDF and 3B PDF. Here we're going to do it in with heart rate as our Y. And then we'll do it with age as our Y. And so it gives me the output first. And didn't open the PDF file. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe that's a fact of the macro itself, but that's okay. We can go find it. And so that's what we get, a nice little report that says the association with gender is significant with this p-value, CVD is not significant with that p-value, blah, blah, blah. So it's a beautiful little way to get what used to be 15 pages of output and end up with just the information that you want. You don't even have to, you could just have age 0.0021, CVD 87. You don't need the conditional execution part to maybe get this use, but I wanted to show you how we could report different messages, have it decide which message to write based upon the p-value. And obviously the p-values that are listed as less than 0.0001, they show up in here as just a 0. So that's the first one. And let's run the second one. Here, if you want to go see what this does, you can try the mlogic and mprint to look at it. I will say that you can see that it's printing out. Again, I did the percent put in my code, so that's why we're seeing all these macro variables. Normally, I would actually go take that out once I was convinced my macro is working. So let's submit this second one. And again, go back and look at that file. And so again, we see that list of variable names and which ones are significant and which ones are not significant. So that's conditional execution. There's a few important points in here. This is a really good macro to make sure you study, because we've done the do while, which is tricky. We have to do our counter first outside the loop and add it before I leave the loop to create the looping process. You can get stuck in a do while or a do until if you don't do it right. An infinite loop can happen. We used ODS output. We used sim put, which is the tricky part, pulling a variable into a macro variable. And again, you can see we created a macro variable here called p-value %i. So I need to use that double ampersand in front when I recall this, which is a little bit strange. One of those ampersands is to tell it, hey, I need you to put these two pieces of information together just like they are. Then I need you to read the macro variable that's that piece of information. So it's a little bit tricky. And then we did the conditional execution. And this is a %if. That's conditional execution. Regular if is just a regular if. So here, when I did if label, there's no %if. That's just a regular data step if statement. So if-thens, like regular data steps, they do what they always have done. But if I want to do conditional execution in a macro based upon the value of a macro variable, I have to do %if and %then. So be careful with that. Okay, so hopefully that will give you something to think about on how to actually write and use macros yourself. It is one of the most important things we learn in this class, and I am going to be pushing you to try to make sure that you can do these on your own.